Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, thank you. My name is Mike Fabrico. I'm Senior Director at a company called TrapX Security. What we do is early breach detection, lateral movement, so the evolution of the honeypot inside the deception space. Now I know it's a new market, deception, for the past 6 years, up and coming. I realize there's a lot of controversy around physical honeypots and honeypots that scale across enterprises of 3,000 plus networks and such. So today, I've asked Tom Kellermann to speak about this concept of the art of deception, which you probably heard if you read a lot about deception. And Tom does a phenomenal job on winter's coming, or winter has come. So thank you very much for having us, and appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. So my name's Tom. I've been in the security business for 22 years. I am a board member of TrapX. I started a fund to invest in cybersecurity companies specific to an architectural thesis that was attempting to disrupt, if not dismantle, the Russian kill chain specifically. Today's presentation is about the elite hacker crews of the world, about how the modus operandi has shifted, what the things we need to be concerned about, and maybe some sort of actions we can take, re-architectures we can move forward with to deal with this threat. So a lot can be learned from the French. If you think about the history of World War II and the invasion of France and the Vichy France phenomenon, that was because of essentially the arrogance of the architects of the Maginot Line. It was the greatest fortification ever developed. It was weaponized, it was fortified, there were train tunnels under it, air conditioning, etc., etc. It was invincible at that time to tank fire, to bombings, etc. But there was a gap in the Ardennes forest. And essentially what happened was that the Panzer tanks and the paratroopers came through those lowlands and essentially invaded France. That is the same problem we're facing today with the current cybersecurity architectures that are mandated to our sector and to the government as a whole. The NIST framework has failed, the FFIEC Information Security Handbook is outdated, and everything else you look at there that recommends defense in depth is not in line with the tactics or the modus operandi of the adversaries in today's world. With fireless malware, island hopping, watering hole attacks et al., we need to learn that the answer, the true ROI for cybersecurity, is decreasing dwell time and being able to hunt the adversary unbeknownst to the adversary when they're in our networks. So you're on your own. There will never be an international treaty against cybercrime because China and Russia and the G77 disagree with the construct of freedom of speech. For them, it's information warfare. Any new information, whether it's a Google search or a new website, allows for or precipitates some sort of action, which is why there's never been a cyber treatise. We could suggest, and Carlos, thank you for your service to the country, that the Budapest Convention is the answer, but only half the world signed on to that. And realistically, the other half has created protection racket states around the hackers that exist within their sovereign boundaries as long as they pay homage to the regimes that exist there. True fact. Part of the problem is this economy of scale that's been developed. The pioneers of the economy of scale that were developed were the Russian-speaking hacker community of Eastern Europe. These folks created an economy of scale not just around bulletproof hosting and cyber money laundering, but the development of zero-day exploits that are now the #1 commodity in the dark web. And it's these 0 days that are the bane of our existence. We continue to talk about patching and patching timetables, but let's face it, we're still naked for a couple weeks, even if we patch quickly to the threats that exist today. The Odenov campaign is greatly significant to this sector as a whole. The Odenov campaign was the campaign that leveraged things like Carbonac. It's the campaign that empowered capabilities against the financial sector that allowed for funds transfer fraud like SWIFT to occur. It allowed for the adversary to become omniscient within your infrastructure because of the elegance of the attack code and because of the nature in which it was clandestine itself. The Brazilians are now mimicking this model. The Brazilians have, I would say, the second best hacker community in the world. And as you see from the I can't pronounce it either, frankly, however you want to pronounce it. The functional reality here is, as you can see, the point of being inside a network is to be omniscient. It's not just about stealing credentials, it's about the capacity to have screen scraping capabilities and to move laterally within an infrastructure and to turn an infrastructure against itself and to learn from the operators who are allowed to move money or the system administrators about the true operations and protocols that are important to that organization. We've talked a lot about ransomware this year. We've talked a lot about different types of attacks that are out there, but I'd like to point out in 2016, Key Ranger. What's unique isn't that it was ransomware for a Mac, even though it was the first ransomware attack against Macs, it's the fact that it hit the backups first. Your number one defense against ransomware is to have regular backups. Well, they actually hit the backups first. And it shows their elegance in the fact that they are watching how we conduct incident response. They are sharing information about best practices, and they're using them against us. There's been a great success in international law enforcement to shut down the major command and controls and the infrastructures behind the exploit community. The exploit kit community, many of the major exploit kits in the world have been successfully shut down, but they're not dead. And the most interesting one of late has been the Neptune exploit kit. This thing is regularly updated with 0 days. This thing is leveraging attacks and command and control on sleep cycles into image files through steganography. This thing is, excuse my French, badass. And it harkens and highlights the nature in which now, because of things like shadow brokers, Vault 7 being hacked, the utility of United States cyber weaponry to be used against the masses, the fact that there are more and more capabilities that are widely available to the neophytes of the world and the traditional cybercrime syndicates. I think the most interesting fact about NotPetya was the fact that it was fake crime. Like the fake news stuff we hear about, this was fake crime. This was literally an attack masquerading as a criminal endeavor, which had no desire to be paid out whatsoever. It was destructive in nature, and it hearkened and illustrated to all of us, and it should have warned us, that these things will not only destroy our infrastructures, but they'll move laterally through our infrastructures, and that the worm is back. One of the things that we have forgotten is that the kill chain is not just 6 stages long. The modern kill chain includes a maintenance stage. The modern kill chain includes the use of steganography to hide secondary command and control code on a sleep cycle. It's imperative, because of the success of FireEye, because of the success of terminating command and control vis-a-vis your response to an event, hackers have realized they have to put a second command and control inside the ecosystem as it exists. And they also need to be much more stealthy about how they move laterally. But what's most important here is we have to represent and accept that we have to invert our security model. This is because more and more of our infrastructures, whether they're ours or part of our information supply chain, which includes your outside marketing firm, your outside law firm, the cloud service provider you utilize, etc. The MSSP that does great security for you but doesn't actually practice what they preach internally. These folks have become the epicenter of the black plague of today. And that's why this is a trend microstat. I used to be the CISO there. Secondary infections are occurring within an hour. Part of a kill chain that hits you, you're seeing another piece of malware dropped inside your system after the initial piece of malware because they're trying to colonize us. They're trying to colonize us. We're no longer dealing with burglaries, we're dealing with home invasion. The environment has become more hostile, and it is about colonization, not burglarization. One of the last studies I produced when I was at Trend Micro was a survey of critical infrastructure heads of security in the Western Hemisphere regarding cyber attacks. It was facilitated by the Organization of American States through the Justice Ministries throughout Latin America, all the way up to Canada, and we actually got to ask a number of questions. But the most interesting question that was answered was, have you dealt with delete and destroy attacks in 2016? 44% of the constituents said they had dealt with delete and destroy attacks that year. 95% of them said these weren't part of activism or ransomware, it was part of counter-incident response. Visualize this. You wake up in the middle of the night, there's a burglar in your house. Your alarm trips, you call the cops, you scream out downstairs, I know you hear I've called the cops. The burglar chooses to set your house on fire. This is happening But there's no reporting standards, there are no demands on reporting for this phenomenon, and we need to appreciate this, because if we're too loud in how we respond to an adversary in today's environment, whether it's us or the people we service, whether it's the constituencies that we partner with, you might deal with this phenomenon. This is compounded by the functional reality that geopolitics is now a harbinger for cybersecurity campaigns that could be, and very well should be, destructive in nature. Pawn Storm, which is the elegant campaign of cyber militias that were Russian speaking, that were paying homage to the regime, that didn't just hack the election, they targeted major institutions, the energy sector, the financial sector, etc., and they were fantastic at it. They were the first ones to leverage viable attacks on non-jailbroken iOS devices to leverage proximity setting attacks against the individuals there. They were the first ones to leverage 19 plus 0 days in one campaign over 2 years' time. But this is an illustration that you create economic sanctions against a nation state, you will see a reaction. The major cyber criminals of the world were leveraged as part of cyber militias in order to maintain their untouchable status within those countries. The Chinese are back. The Chinese are back, not the whole country. There are elements of cyber criminality in China. There are intelligence operations in China. All you have to do is pay attention to Stone Panda. Stone Panda is elegant because it targets major corporations for strategic knowledge vis-a-vis the mergers and acquisition strategies and or the long-term announcements that they may be making in the markets that are particularly important to the regime. What was interesting about this campaign, the Cloud Hopper campaign, is it went from spear phishing to watering hole attacks to island hopping. And what that highlights to us is the following. After I hack you, metaphorically here, now I'm going to turn your brand against your constituency. Now I'm going to turn your website against the constituency. Instead of business email compromise attacks, I'm going to leverage attacks from your mail server, legit mail server, to your constituency with payloads or with fireless malware. It makes perfect sense. You have a premier brand. Everyone trusts communications from you and everyone trusts what you've put out there on the web. Now I'm going to turn it in on itself. So how do we deal with this? I can continue to go through these threat actor groups, but I don't want to bore you. And I'm not here to stand between you and Drakes. What I am here to do is suggest that there is a solution to this problem and it's not one technology or another. What I'm here to tell you is that offense must inform defense. For those of you who play chess, this is about spinning the chessboard and creating a knight's fork. Force the adversary to lose their queen on the board. The only way to force the adversary to lose their queen on the board is to essentially decrease their dwell time and hunt them unbeknownst to them while you tendril back. I'm not advocating active defense. I'm advocating you provide enough telemetry to law enforcement, the US military, or your security team, or your outside general counsel to deal with the problem. That being said, offense, what's changing? More and more you're going to see destructive attacks leveraged through watering hole attacks. Punitive measures to destroy brands as a method of competitive advantage, as a method of geopolitical or economic advantage. More and more mobile devices will be hacked by senior executives and proximity settings will be leveraged because of the fact that most of us don't use real cybersecurity on our mobile devices. Android's got how many millions of pieces of malware out there for it? iOS is not invincible to attack. The walled garden has failed because now you just compile the code on the device as long as you can get the code there. And Safari is ubiquitously used and thus man-in-the-browser attacks are flourishing. This is a functional reality of insider trading, front running, and the capacity to read your mind. At a minimum, tell your executives, if they have to bring their stuff in, turn it on airplane mode. If they have to bring it in, just put it on airplane mode. At a minimum, I know that doesn't solve everything. In addition, business email compromise as a second stage, not to transfer funds, to leverage your mail servers against the people who trust you, against your investors, against your regulators, against whoever is of import that would receive mail from you and open it. And then lastly, front-running self-evident, is the wipers deployed as counter-incident response. This is happening more and more often. You have to be careful if you choose to turn off command and control. You have to be careful if you attempt to tendril back or forensically move on a target because these people are doing a much better job of operational security now and they've become truly punitive. So the answer, I think, to our riddle is to decrease dwell time before it gets to this stage. The answer to this is truly in that we need more visibility internally, and we really should turn the infrastructure upside down. We continue to try to build castles in the sky based on standards that are outdated, that were created 6 or 7 years ago, based on the fact that spear phishing was your biggest problem and your insider threat was your biggest problem, without taking into account everything that's being done. Fact. The US government realized too many people were breaking out of prison, too many psychopaths, sociopaths, and highly intellectual individuals, which is why they built the ADX facility in Florence, Colorado in 1992. This thing was built by psychologists and architects. This supermax was built to create an environment where the prisoner was situationally unaware of where they are, who they're communicating with, and how they move between the facility. Even if they got out, they have no bearings on where they were. Even the sunlight in their cells was put at an angle so they stared at the desert sky in Florence, Colorado, which is in the middle of the plateau. You see what I'm saying to you? Why can't you make your environment look like this? Why can't your environment resemble this once they get past the firewalls, once they get past the EDR that you've deployed? This is the facility. Hopefully you never have to go here. It's a 70-mile drive. It sits by itself 70 miles in the desert, and you functionally need to realize that you're never getting out. This is exactly what we need to do with our infrastructure. I'm not recommending you replace your firewalls. I'm not recommending you replace your EDR. I'm not recommending you replace your encryption. What I'm recommending is, after that, begin to focus on decreasing dwell time, observing lateral movement, and being able to spin the chessboard on the adversary. So, from my perspective, as someone who specializes in penetration testing, I recommend we need forward-leaning cybersecurity. I recommend we need to limit dwell time. We need to modernize incident response. A great example of such is, why aren't you doing penetration tests or attack path mapping from the perspective of the compromised host instead of just re-imaging, forensically identifying, and cleaning? These people more than likely have moved, and they've moved on, and they continue to move on. They know your network better than you do because you're massive. But why not run that exercise? Some very proactive financial institutions are standing up hunt teams for this very purpose. What's a hunt team? Isn't that your incident response team? Nope. It's a couple members of your pen test team or your red team. It's a couple members of your IR team, and it's a couple members of your threat intelligence team working together to be thoughtful about how we stage our response. For financial institutions, you and I both know that most of the money goes against anti-money laundering. The AML budgets within institutions is far greater than your IT security budget, period. But we need to begin to take money from this trough. Know thy customer being the marquee point, but beyond that, the functional reality that you don't want cyber crimes to be enabled and thus launder money through your infrastructure or facilitating such. So when you're looking for money in your institution, you should have that conversation and begin escalating that conversation with the person that runs AML. In addition, proactive strategies for mitigation. I do believe in the 20 critical controls. Tony Sager was spot on. Tony Sager, Yoda, the Jedi Master of NSA's cyber, created these things for a reason. They were based on the pen testing teams and the red teams of the NSA. They constantly evolve. Yes, you need to be doing OWASP testing. Yes, you need to be doing these things, but at a bare minimum, you need to achieve these. Memory augmentation is here. There's too much information, guys. We're being flooded by inputs. Whether it's the SIM, the firewall, the endpoints, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to conduct reverse search. User entity behavior analytics, just visualize that as being your German Shepherd that doesn't bark or growl. This thing just roams your network looking for unknown unknowns. And when it triggers, you have some way to react to it should it have the right integration strategy. For those of us who have breach detection systems and intrusion protection systems, why the hell are they not integrated? You have individuals who are responsible to communicate with one another in real time based on events that are no longer machine to machine. This is a fundamental problem as well. Red teaming, please. Red teaming not just outside in, but inside out. And understanding what inside out looks like from the perspective of your outside general counsel or from the marketing firm that's going to have the information related to the press release that you're going to release to the markets next quarter. And then lastly, deception. When all else fails, you want zero false positives if someone's inside of your house, use deception. Deception is not limited to lures. Deception isn't just about alluring, it's about engaging and inevitably trapping. The more time you can engage and trap an adversary, the more time it gives you to respond to that adversary in real time. My predictions for the coming year are not good. Pawnstorm is already escalating again. It's back. Trend Micro's got some great research on it. It continues unabated, and it's escalating again. The sanctions have not been removed from Russia, so Pawnstorm thus is increasing. APT-10, which is Cloud Hopper campaign, Stone Panda, is now beginning to shift, it already is, to TSP, the technical service provider community of the financial sector as a whole. And they are your weak link. It's not just you. It's the TSP community. Even the GAO and the Inspector General of the FDIC noted that the TSP community does not sufficiently protect their own assets, yet we are reliant upon them for services in the financial sector. Watering hole attacks are increasing, and more important, they're delivering cryptoware and other forms of destructive payloads. Ransomware worms are becoming the new normal thanks to shadow brokers leaking a lot of US weaponry, but this is going to escalate as people realize the model works. And counter-IR integrity attacks are here to stay. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to convince the world he didn't exist, and that devil right now is inside your network. And it behooves you now to decrease the dwell time of that devil. Thank you.
Do we have time for a few questions? Anyone? Sure.
Can you describe a little more the concept of hunting the invaders after they have gotten through the firewall?
Yeah. So you need to have visibility to lateral movement. That can only be achieved through two different ways, two types of technologies in today's environment. If you're not using an EDR, internally you really have to have a user entity behavior analytics platform or UBA platform, or you should be selectively deploying deception grids or deceptive technology as a whole within your infrastructure based on the recommendations of your red team once they've conducted an attack path map from inside out. Make sense? So once your red team or your hunt team conducts the attack path mapping exercise from your most sensitive databases, users, subnets, once that's been done, if you were to throw deception grids along those, you could get greater telemetry as to something being inside of your home, which is why I'm obviously honored to be here on part of TrapX. But the point of the matter is simple. Your hunt team needs to include IR members, pen testers, and cyber intelligence folks. They all have different lenses on how they view the problem, and it's important.
Anyone else?
Hello. Would you be able to talk a little bit more on deception, on the deception mindset portion of this? Because you really brushed past it, and I was really interested in that.
Sure. So you can't just deploy deception grids, okay? Deception technology must be deployed in concert with an effective mapping exercise of how you're vulnerable from inside out, okay? How you're vulnerable not just from the infiltration of your own infrastructure, but how your infrastructure could attack other infrastructures. I think it's important that you pursue a strategy of not just luring the adversary to trigger an event or trip a wire that they're there, but to engage that adversary along the way so that you have more time to react to them. There's only two deception capabilities in the market that can actually allow you to achieve that, and one of which is obvious, it's TrapX. The functional point here is that deception shouldn't be limited to your own infrastructure. It should be an extension of you at a minimum to the technical service providers or the technology providers whom you are completely dependent upon so that you can get zero false positives on the events. But again, the art of deploying deception, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you need to conduct that attack path mapping exercise to understand the subnets, the users, and et al. That are your most vulnerable in case you have been compromised.
So it's threat modeling times 100, pretty much.
Yeah. But you can task, everyone's got a red team, everyone conducts a pen test. Why don't you challenge that team to go inside out for once?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great.
Carlos.
So just a quick reaction, Tom. So fantastic, and that every time I hear you talk, it's always great. But I was going to say, I would concur so strongly with you about the fact that we are stuck on a model that comes from NIST, and it is several years old.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not.
With all due respect to Dr. Ron Ross.
Yes, but we're not saying obviously that defense in depth is not necessary. We're certainly saying it's insufficient to where things have morphed.
Defense in depth will solve 95% of your problem.
Yeah.
But if you have a significant enough brand,
Then that 5%
you will be hit by
is-
that other 5%.
That-
And you can continue to ramp up your security defense in depth, but you will constantly be dealing with an adversary that is utilizing the
Usually-
greatest
utilizing
hackers in their
that.
community as
That's
a
right.
national asset.
That's right. So this message of yours needs to scale broader, wider, and deeper in all the sectors that we're talking about. Particularly, the next session that will take place, I guess, in some weeks on the critical infrastructure, the financial sector, and all. What's being done about your message? I think you need to. You can't be the lone voice in the wilderness.
Sean Canuck, former deputy DNI for cyber, and I are on the same page. Trent Tiyama, who runs cyber operations for the FBI, and I are on the same page.
Okay.
Trent is not allowed to speak publicly,
Yeah.
but I can say he's on my page. Sean just got out, so he's so happy to be out after serving the government for many years. The problem with my message is you have to come to Jesus, forgive the term, that we're compromised. And it's almost like going to the doctor and recognizing and appreciating you have cancer now. I'm terribly sorry, my father's dying of cancer, but I'll use that metaphor here in so much that now we need to react fast. And we need to begin to appreciate the fact that the three shifts in the landscape that have really changed, and you've known me for years, are the following. One, more and more weaponized code is being utilized by adversaries, and those adversaries are leveraging your brand against itself. Two, more and more of these adversaries are leveraging counterincident response and becoming much more punitive in their reaction to your effectiveness with your security. And then lastly, geopolitics has fueled an advancement, dramatic advancement among state actors, not just the traditional enemies of the state per se. But if you look at APT-33, the Iranian group, I mean, my God, they've gone from script kiddie BS to absolute gangster methodology, employing many of the same techniques, just like Lazarus. Lazarus is North Korean, let's be real. They're great now. They're really good at what they're doing, and they're literally counteracting economic sanctions through cyber attack. Literally. And so you're seeing, I guess, the game being played against us and a lack of appreciation for that. I think that it's to the comparative advantage of financial institutions in this room to get back to the basics of safety and soundness and trust and confidence. And encryption isn't the answer. And what is the answer is you can tell your board of directors that this year from last, you're reacting faster. Last year, it took you 3 months to realize it was a compromise. This year, you literally took a couple days. And it's that, I think, is the true delta there, is the ROI for the justification for your investment. And if you're having problem getting resources, besides the AML folks, the marketing officers are also the answer. Why? If you didn't know this, fun fact, 12% of publicly traded companies' budgets are being spent on marketing. 95% of that marketing is digital marketing. The next time you have a 0 day in WordPress, try to figure out who's in charge of WordPress in your organization as a CISO, and you'll find out it's the outside marketing firm leveraging a blog to reach out to millennials. And you'll be like, oh my God, I didn't even know we're using WordPress. No one authorized that. But it's happening to you right now. So I'm recommending that chief marketing officers get on the same page, and the way you do that is this is a brand protection issue. And if anything we've learned from Equifax or Merck or FedEx is that reputational risk is now metastasizing because of a lack of appreciation for this issue. And I'll close on that because I stand between you guys and drinks. So, salud. Thank you.
Thank you.